This interview is being conducted for Inverkeithing People Making History Oral History Project. My name is Dr Sue Morrison and the respondent is Daoud Rhouma. This is the 7th of December 2021 and the interview is taking place in Inverkeithing Civic Centre. Thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed, Daoud.
You're
much
welcome.
appreciated. For the record, would you please confirm your full name?
My name is Daoud Rhouma.
Thank you. And what is your age or just your year of birth?
66, I believe.
1966.
No, 1954. I'm born in
Right.
1954.
Sorry.
I've only retired since June, so.
It's because you look so young. That's why I had to query. Where were you born, Daoud?
I was born in Tunis,
And when did you move to Scotland?
1976.
Did you come straight to Inverkeithing?
Yeah, I lived in Inverkeithing all my life, yeah.
Could you tell me what Inverkeithing was like when you moved here?
Very much the same, a lot less cars, so there's only maybe a handful of cars. It was nice and relaxed, and I believe it was April 12th or something when I flew across to Edinburgh. That was the old airport with water running right in the middle of the building, and it was like a tin hat kind of thing. That's what I remember of the old airport in Edinburgh. That's basically it. That's all I.
Could I ask why you came to Scotland?
I met my wife when I was 16-year-old. I knew Nancy for about 5 or 6 years. And I had to do my national service when I was 20, but I volunteered for it when I was 19. I done my national service. After my national service, we decided to get married and immigrate. But Nancy could have immigrated to Tunisia, but I don't think she would have got as good a job as she would in her own country. Plus, she would have to learn the language in Tunisia, which is difficult. When I came over, I only spoke French and some German, and it took me about maybe 7-8 months to get the basics of the language. I used to help my father-in-law. He worked for in Grossgates for a fruit and veg company, and just picked it up as I went along. Never had any lessons, and because I spoke French, I found that quite easy actually to go on to learn the language. And I got my first job within about maybe 2.5 months. I went for my interview at TW Wards. It was Mr. Og that interviewed me. He actually played football with my father-in-law. And as soon as he heard the name Dixon, he realized that my father-in-law was actually a friend of his. He just told me to start on Monday. And the job lasted for about 5 years. So. And after 5 years with Wards, I think it was April, maybe May 21. I started to start in the mill within maybe 5 years afterwards. I'm sure it was 81 when I started. And the job there lasted for about 20 years. I got to know quite a lot of people from all over Fife, mainly Rosyth, Kelty, Cowdenbeath, Grossgates, all those. And I stayed there till the job was no longer available. That's all I can say about it.
Thank you. Dad, can I just take you back to when you started at Wards?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of training was there?
At the time, I was given the job of being a burner, basically cut and scrap steel for the company. And they had a German destroyer or warship of some kind. It was a very difficult kind of ship to break up. It had thousands of yards of cables inside and copper. It was a very gave them a good return on their investment, but it was a lot of hard work doing it. I got trained by Mr. Mackay from Burnt Island. He was he was there for a lot of years, maybe 15, 20 years before me. I was trained for a week, and within a week I moved to right next to him because we worked alongside each other, and he just kept an eye on me, and that was it.
What was your first impression of the yard?
It's steel and sparks flying everywhere, so I had to get used to it because that was actually my first full-time job. I had part-time jobs in hotel work in Tunisia alongside my student years, but I never really had as hard a job as that. You have to get used to it, or you have to see it to believe it, because it's very hot, especially in the summertime. Because the torch can do quite a lot of dust about, and the heat of it was unbelievable. But you get used to it. When you have to do it, you have to do it. That's all I can say about the job itself.
Did you wear any safety protection?
We had oxygen masks, and we had like an apron, leather apron, boots, steel two-cap boots, and the overalls. We got overalls from them. That's all the safety equipment we had.
How many hours a week did you work?
I believe it was 8 hours for 5 days, and Saturday worked for 4 hours. That's all the hours I've done for quite a few years.
Did they just have the day shift?
Day shift, yeah. There was no night shifts. Sometimes people stayed behind just to receive a new vessel, like we had super tankers coming in, and oil tankers. Well, not super tankers, but they were huge ships. So we needed people to get them tied up. And
that sounds like an enormous job.
It was quite a difficult job.
How many workers were there?
I think at the highest was probably maybe a couple of hundred, maybe more. Yeah, and they had people cutting the ship up, or they actually separated the scrap, like brass from steel and copper from steel, because there's a lot of money involved in copper at the time, and brass, white metal, you name it was there. Like this, especially the German ship, it had a lot of equipment in it. It took them maybe 2-3 years to scrap it. Well, the tankers were not a big problem. Within a few months, the tanker just was out of water.
So can you explain the process to a total novice who knows nothing about it? Do you start from the inside out, or the top down, or? Top
down usually, and we don't start anything till they actually air the ship and let the air in, because especially the tankers, because some of them actually had chemicals or fuel like petrol or oil, so they air them up and emptied any flammables, and then the work starts. But even some of the hammers they used, they were bronze hammers, so when you use a hammer it doesn't make any sparks, because a single spark could actually cause an explosion on board. And we just got to know about those things with experience and that. Labourers were the only people allowed on the ship to air it and get safe for the burners to work on it. Most of the time it took maybe 2-3 months before anybody went on board to start cutting.
Did some of these vessels arrive with all the furniture and things?
Everything, including silverware, and anything that the captain used. When a ship is scrapped, everything stays on board, and basically it was scrapped. The silverware, I believe, was sold on to maybe silversmiths or whatever, and the furniture most of the time was just scrapped, or if it's wood or whatever, they just burn it, because they weren't allowed to sell it on.
Did the workers ever take souvenirs home?
No, you can't take souvenirs, but you can buy items. You can buy mirrors, all kinds of stuff. But I've never really bothered to buy anything, because it wasn't really, I didn't need anything for my house at the time.
I've heard on the grapevine that lots of houses at that time had materials from the breaker's yard.
I don't really know much about that, but I suppose some people bought boats for fishing, whatever, because every super tanker or ship that came in had rescue boats on board, so they were sold on to individuals or companies. There got a lot of hardwood on board. Yeah, tons and tons of hardwood because all the repairs on the ships were done on board. There's a joiner or qualified people to do that kind of thing. And you won't believe it till you see it. I mean, some of the hardwood on board is worth hundreds of thousands. And that goes as scrap. But once the wood is emptied, the rest just gets cut up to size and sent down south to different companies to reprocess it.
So, as you kind of come in towards the end of the process and the ship's been emptied,
Mm-hmm.
Is it actually emptied inside? Are you walking in the hull?
All the wood gets, the labourers start on the woodwork because the captain quarters and the staff quarters have a lot of furniture. That's got to be emptied because that would be a fire hazard if you leave it inside. But when you're burning anything inside, even the paint sometimes catches fire. Yeah, because there is a lot of coats of paint on board the ship, so they have to be very careful. And any wood or flammables gets removed right away.
Do you know what happened to the good hardwood afterwards? Was that sold on?
I believe some of it was sold on to a company in Dundee. I believe he was a relation of the manager or the friend of the manager. A lot of the anything that can get used for second-hand stuff, I think a huge shop in Dundee was buying most of it.
So almost everything was getting recycled?
Yeah. But not sold as new items. They were all sold as scrap items. And whoever is buying the stuff knows exactly what they're buying. The wood, obviously, it's getting used for windows or doors, whatever. I don't know much about that either. All I know, it was sold on to the shop in Dundee, and from then I don't really know what happens to that.
Did you work on one vessel at a time?
At the time, I believe, when I started my job, we were working on the German ship, and I stayed on that right up till the last item of the ship was scrapped. And then we got 2 or 3 oil tankers. After them came the Maidstone. I don't know if you ever heard of it. That was a prison ship, a British vessel. It was deployed in, I believe, somewhere in Northern Ireland for keeping prisoners from Northern Ireland on board the ship. Basically, it's prisoners were brought onto the ship, and the ship was sailed out somewhere, and nobody knows where the exact area where the ship was at the time. So people had they reckon it was escape-proof. Nobody could escape from it because you're in the middle of the Atlantic. So even if you get out your cell, you can't go anywhere. Don't really know the names of anybody that was held on board. But all I know was Northern Ireland people, that's all. It was quite a shock really to go on board it and see. It wasn't a comfortable ship. You can see it as a prison, very much on water. That's the only vessel I've seen like that in my life. I've seen a lot of tankers, a lot of maybe cruise boats, things like that, but never a prison ship.
Did it have individual cells then?
Not individual cells, but obviously people were locked up in certain rooms. I have no idea which room it was because I didn't work on board the ships. I was working on the shore, and we received small parts of the boat at a time to scrap. But I didn't see any cells or anything like that.
Was there ever a gap between vessels being there available for you to break?
Oh, if you're working on one ship, they don't start a new boat till that ship is totally out of the water. And the warships were very difficult to break, and they took longer. But the oil tankers and the oil tankers were maybe 50% easier to scrap and quicker to finish than the warships. The warships were more complicated.
So as soon as you finished breaking one ship, the next one came in?
No, sometimes they had 3 or 4 ships lying on site, but we always worked on one at a time. We didn't, and the rest of them were getting prepared to be scrapped because the managers and that knew exactly what they were doing. You
mentioned some of the dangers earlier. Did you see any accidents?
No, not during the day. I've only worked there for about 5 years. But I knew about an accident that happened maybe a few years before I started. It was a gas explosion on board, and a member of staff, one of the labourers there lost his sight, and he was still working there when I started my job. I can't remember his name, but I believe he was a local person. I'm not very sure how many people died in the incident, but actually parts of the ship landed this side of the water along the crescent. The explosion was quite big. I don't know the name of the ship or anything like that, because it was quite a few years before I started.
So if it was a gas explosion, would that have been kind of newly made and just starting to take apart?
Probably. All it takes is maybe a gas cylinder leaking, and a spark will cause an explosion. If it's enclosed, that makes the explosion a lot harder, a lot more lethal. Luckily, I don't know how many people, if any, died, but I've seen the one person that lost his eyesight. He was still walking and working for the company right up till the day he retired. But that's the only person I know that he was on board that ship.
So you were working outside, were you?
I'm always working on the shore outside, yeah. Each person had their own quarters and their own, maybe about 20 meters to yourself, because quite a lot of sparks flying everywhere, so you can't have anybody else beside you.
Did you work all weathers?
No. If the weather got severe or raining, we went to the hut and we stayed inside. We had free tea. Lunchtime, we can get 3-course meals for about maybe 50 pence or something like that. Yeah, it was subsidized by the company. And I believe all the ladies that worked on site in the kitchen and that, they were all from Inverkeithing. I remember their faces, but I can't tell you their names. And one of them stayed in Fraser Avenue. That's all I remember of her. She was the head of the kitchen. You got soup, main course, plus a sweet for pennies at the time. Yeah. Breakfast, you got your tea or coffee, and that's supplied by the company.
Did any women work actually doing the breaking?
No. It's mainly men. I don't know. I can't remember of any women working on the scrapyard site. There was office workers, and even the office workers, I don't really know very many of them, because they weren't really involved directly with the shore staff.
Were there any particular characters that worked in the breakers yard?
No, there's plenty of characters. You get to know people, and some of them were really funny, very funny people.
Can you tell me about any?
Tom Mullen, he sticks in my mind. He's an Inverkeithing guy. I knew Tom for a good part of about 20 years. He's got a brother in Inverkeithing. I knew his brother, but I only knew him by sight. I only spoke to him once, and I think we were drinking in the borough. I got to speak to him. His brother was very quiet type of person, but Tommy was very, outgoing and very loud and very, very funny. Everything he says could be a laugh. And I worked alongside him. He was a crane driver. He drove a small mobile crane, and if we needed scrap taken away, he collected it. But the main parts that we got was always supplied by the big cranes dropped on your side of, and once it's all cut up, Tom Mullen or somebody else. We had another person from, I think he was from Ockley, Nick Pierce. He was another crane driver that I worked with. He was actually a musician, part-time musician. Him and his wife, they played in a band somewhere in Fife, and there was they had a lot of business at the weekend. He was a big tall guy. I mean, he's maybe 6'8", 6'9", blonde hair right down to his waist, huge beard. His wife was a wee petite woman. They had one son, I remember. I was actually invited to their house in Ockley and got to know their wee boy at the time. He's called Jackson. That's all I remember of him. Probably if I see him just now, I won't know him. He'll be a grown man. It has been a long time since then.
It sounds like you made some good friends there.
Yes, we used to, around Christmas time, we used to go out together and go for a drink or a meal or whatever. The only relation with Tom was actually meeting him in pubs here. And I always remember going to the Volleys, and I sat down and Tom was playing darts, and everybody was telling me, that's Tom's seat, you can sit there, because he was very loud and very renowned in the village. I told my friend, it's okay, don't worry about it. And the next thing, Tom was asking me for a drink and hugging me, and he considered him a really close friend. He was a nice person in a way.
What's your favourite memory working at the Breakers Yard?
To be honest, knowing everybody, knowing a lot of people, and everywhere you go, you always meet one of them. It was a close friendship, I could call it. Quite a few of them I got to know, even members of their family, and that from all over Fife. And that's the best part of the job at the time. And it paid my bills. My wife didn't work for about 5 years because we had 2 small kids. Right up to the end of the job, I came in one day and my mother-in-law said, I think I've got you a job in the paper mill. That's everybody. It was always through family that you got jobs in Fife. They knew somebody that was responsible for employing people, whatever. And she told me, I've got an interview tomorrow with, I believe the gentleman was, sorry, I can't remember his second name, but he lived in Preston Crescent. I can't remember which house he stayed in, because all those houses belonged to the paper mill at one time. And I came in for the interview, interviewed me for about half an hour, and took me to the machine shop and showed me the machine I would be working on, and said, you'll be working there on Monday. And I got 4 weeks training in the paper mill. I believe my machine man was a gentleman from Rosyth. The dryerman was from North Queens Ferry. John Gregg, I remember him. He's the Gregg family still lived on North Queens Ferry, and the machine man was from Rosyth. Jimmy Stewart, his name. He was maybe around his 50s. I worked there for about 2-3 years, and then I got promoted to a dryerman, and I moved to the machine next door to it. Was number 4 machine, and my machine man was actually an Inverkeithing gentleman, Jimmy McElhinney, his name, and I stayed there for a good part of about maybe 10 years as a dryerman. I was the dryerman, Jimmy McElhinney was the machine man, and I remember one of the laddies, basically the new starts are called laddies, was from Rosyth. I had people from Rosyth, Inverkeithing, working as laddies alongside me and Jimmy McElhaney. I remember one of them, I think his name was Ali McGill. He was a Rosyth guy. His wife, I think she was Maltese descent or something like that. And that's all I know about his family. But you got to know quite a lot of people and quite a lot of their, because we socialized outside the mill. We still went to parties or dances and things like that. Actually, the mill used to organize nights out for everybody, and they actually paid for all the food and everything. They had a lot of money laid aside for entertaining their workers, and that went for quite a few years.
Where did you go for these nights out?
Inverkeithing Club, different restaurants like I can't mind the name of the hotel, just outside. You know where Pichivi Golf Club is? The hotel is right next to the golf course in Dunfermline. I can't mind the name of the hotel because it's changed quite a few times from then. We used to go to the Eastport. We had meals on site, and we maybe went from one place to another or different clubs for just drink, and 10 o'clock everybody went back home. That's all I remember of it.
Was that your last bus?
No, most of the time I got picked up by my wife or my father-in-law, because the buses only run to a certain time. I think 9 o'clock, maybe 9:30, and that was the last bus, probably 11:30. I've never stayed as late as that. We usually finished drinking maybe 9 o'clock, 8:30. So it was quite suitable for my father-in-law to pick me up. He drove everybody everywhere.
Just going back to your work in the mill,
Sure.
Could you talk me through the process?
A lot of people think making paper is an easy process. It's a very expensive and a lot of hard work involved in it. Everything starts at the hydros. The hydro is basically just a pulping machine. And the bales of pulp, you get hardwood and softwood mixed together, depending on the grade of paper you're making. It gets pulped, and the pulping takes about maybe an hour for one single hydro, which supplies the machine with about 3 tons of paper. That goes onto the beaters, and the beaters is where all the chemicals gets added onto the paper. They made stamp paper, they made all kinds of paper, printing paper of all kinds, and some of it is very top grade, especially the stamp paper. The stamp paper, before you start an order, the machine had to be cleaned from head to toe. Everything had to be spotless. Took 12 hours, 14 hours. Sometimes took two shifts to finish the cleaning, and then the process starts. From the beater house, the dyes get added on, and all the chemicals needed to make the paper ink proof, because certain chemicals, if they don't go into the paper, the ink would just sink through the paper. And the main chemicals that actually stop that from happening is the starch. The starch actually gets added on halfway through the machine process. You've got the wet end, that's where the machine man is in charge. The dry end starts after the wet end, and that's when the paper is going through the cylinders getting dried, and then the paper goes through the starch, and the starch basically is nozzles right across the width of the machine. Pours starch through on the paper, and the paper gets sealed and pressed. It's all takes seconds. It's very, very complicated. Took me the good part for about maybe 10 years to know every button for the machine. People think a paper machine is tiny. A paper machine could be as long as 150 yards. Yeah, and you've got 4 people working, and on average shift, I think you could walk, if you're the dryerman and the laddie, you could walk on average about 10-12 miles. There's a lot of walking. You have to be quite fit. I've done that job for about 11 years. I used to put on weight during my fair fortnight holiday. You lost that within a week because of the heat and the amount of walking you have to do. But it was a good job, and it was well paid for the time.
Did you wear any protective equipment for that?
Yes, we were supplied for overalls whenever you needed them, steel toe caps. That's basically it. The rest, you have to be fully trained to be allowed to touch anything on the machine.
Was it dangerous at all?
Yes, so there was a lot of accidents. A lot of my friends got small injuries, or they got caught in the machine. I believe quite a few people got hurt. I think one of them was an Inverkeithing lad. I can't remember his second name, but the incident happened at close down. They closed down the machines about 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon, and the machine was actually getting supplied with hot water from the beaters, because they have to flush the whole system, and the hot water was held in a stainless steel tank, and instead of adding the chemical first and then the hot water, he actually filled the cylinder with hot water and put the chemical in. Because of the chemical being volatile, it actually exploded all over him and melted part of his foot, and he was off his work for quite a few months. That's the worst incident I've seen there. But I honestly cannot remember the lad's name, but he went back to his work eventually, and he got compensated for his injuries because he wasn't at fault. The supervisor was at fault on the day, but the supervisor wasn't present. He should have waited and been advised what to do.
What kind of other injuries were there?
People getting caught. The machines were fed through ropes. I cannot explain the system till you see it and working. It's all the ropes go around the cylinders and every part of the machine, the front side of the machine. You put the paper through, just a small sheet, you feed that through, and by the time it reaches the other end, it's actually ready color-wise and everything. Once the decal comes out, the full width of the machine, they run for about 15-20 minutes usually. The start of that paper will always be broken up and sent back for reprocessing, and they start making paper within maybe half an hour most time. Most grades, every single grade that comes through, it's always different weight, different shade. Even white paper, when you look at white paper, you think it's all the same. It's not. A lot of it is different shades, different chemicals going in it. To somebody who hasn't been trained in the paper industry, you wouldn't know what we were talking about till you actually see it getting made. Even the dyes involved, there is dyes involved in white paper. Not one single sheet of paper is made without dye. There's always dye through it, and starch.
Is bleach used?
No, bleach is used for cleaning the machine afterwards. But we used acid for cleaning the pipes, and the acid run through the pipes and cleans the inside. Saturday was from 3 right up till 6 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's always a cleaning process. That's the machine getting ready for Monday morning start. And you probably came across soap stiffeners. Years ago, they used to have small wraps around the soap. That was made in Inverkeithing. Yeah. And believe it or not, the starch and what gets added onto the starch and make the soap, the soap would not last inside the wrapper unless it's protected from bacteria. And the soap is made with a chemical gets added onto the starch, and this chemical actually kills all the bacteria in the paper and stays bacteria proof right up to all different households use it. Unfortunately, the chemical they add on to the soap stiffener was poisonous. Once the machine starts and the paper is through, member staff were not allowed to touch anything on the machine till it's dry, because the Santobrite, that's the chemical they added on to the soap stiffener, and it's a very expensive and very lethal chemical. Yeah. It doesn't get added on in big quantities, but you can actually smell it in the atmosphere. It's very strong, and killed all the bacteria on the soap. Stamp paper was a different process, nice clean process. There was no chemicals added on, just different dyes and different grade of pulp. I mean top class pulp, like long fiber and short fiber for stamp paper. I remember my manager telling me to do a proper clean of the machine because we were about to start, say, 20 or 40 ton of paper for stamp paper. Yeah, it gets delivered to all kinds of printing printing companies all over Britain to make the stamps. A lot of books were made with the paper we made in Inverkeithing.
When was it you started at the paper mill?
I believe it was around the start of 2001.
Do you remember?
Not 2001. 1981, I believe. After 5 or 6 years in wards, I got the job in the mill.
Do you remember what the pay structure was at that time?
We got weekly paid. I can't mind the rate, but it was one of the better jobs you could get in Fife. It's better paid than most other paper mills. Or I believe the group had 4 different paper mills, but I've never really been to anyone else's paper mill. The only mill outside Inverkeithing that I've been to is actually Stonywood in Aberdeen to check some of their machines. I was a machine man by then, and me and my supervisor and the manager went there just to check the process of one of the grades of paper they made in Aberdeen. But we found that our machines was more advanced than the Stonywood one. Yeah.
Do you remember there being any trade union?
Yes, there was. They had a good union in the paper mill. I believe I can always remember the shop steward, the person in charge of the union. He was a local person. I believe he stayed in Inverkeithing. I'm sorry I can't remember his name, but I can't remember his second name or his first name, but I remember his face like I've seen him yesterday. He was a really nice guy. I don't know all the shop stewards, all his assistants. I got to know them, got to know maybe one or two of them, because I was never really directly involved with the union. I was a union member, and that's it. I went to the meetings and voted on certain things, but that's all I know of the union.
Were there any issues that the trade union came in on?
Not really. It is always about pay or conditions, or that's it. Never any major problems. We never had any strikes right up till maybe I was in the mill for about 15 years before the first strike, and it only lasted one day. We got what the union was demanding at the time, and it was quite a friendly, although we went on strike for one day, but it wasn't any ill feelings between the management and the workers, because we were only asking for some rights or certain conditions, nothing major.
What's your favourite memory of the mill?
The paper mill, the friends you get, the people you get to know, that's my favourite. I can't tell you, I could go to any village in Inverkeithing, in Fife, and find somebody that I worked with, or related to a person that I worked with. It was always nice. That's the best part of it. Till this day, I get phone calls from North Queensferry or Kelty, and that's people I worked with. Quite a few of them I still remember their second names, because I had quite a few outings with them. And Archie McLaren, I believe he was at university. Eventually he left the wards and he got involved with studying and he got full qualification for a teacher. I knew he was teaching somewhere in Fife, but I was quite friendly with him. I knew people from Dunfermline, bar supporters, some of the managers that stayed in. Brian Dewar was another person I got close with. He was a Dunfermline guy. He had 2 kids, 2 boys. One of them nearly made it as a professional footballer. Unfortunately, he wasn't good enough for Rangers, or he got taken on for maybe 2 or 3 months, but he was dropped because he didn't have the touch or what they were looking for at the time.
Dad, I think that's all of my questions. Is there anything you would like to add?
All I can add is really Inverkeithing changed a bit. There's more cars, more people about, but it's still quite a nice, friendly place. That's all I can say about it.
Thank you very much for sharing your memories.
You're
It's been a
welcome.
delight. Thank
Okay.
you.